Game 2 of Week 1, Boise State versus the University of Wyoming. Boise pulled the dub against Wyoming in Game 1 with a twist on a standard teamfight comp, putting Dean, their all-star support, on Ari. This is how Wyoming struck back in Game 2. The first three bans of C-Lol are generally comfort picks or super OPs that the team is known to play. Boise decided to go with the strategy of kicking Wyoming off their comforts. I don't necessarily disagree with this strategy in principle. Wyoming, of course, did the opposite in banning out the 1 OP of Graves and then hitting comfort picks. Wyoming bans are also a cover for their jungler, Devious King being only Gold 2 and the highest skill disparity going against a Masters player in eThug 222. Boise going for the first pick flex pick of Yone. It can generally be flexed between top and mid, but this pick is mostly a mid laner. The interesting thing about this pick is that it wasn't in pick ban from Game 1, despite being a generally A to S tier pick. Here, Boise showing a little bit of flexibility in their drafts. Wyoming had little or no reason to expect the first pick Yone or that much priority on Yone, seeing as it didn't show up in Game 1. The flex pick gives the ability to move the champion into different matchups if Boise wanted to. The response to the Yone was Trundle and Kaisa for Wyoming. Trundle being a pick away from Red Hot's de facto being a 4th ban, and Kaisa being the highest priority AD carry in the game. If you're not picking Kaisa on Red side first rotation, you're actually trolling. The Trundle does throw down the gauntlet and says either 1v1 me in top lane as a carry, or have fun in the Trundle matchup as tank. This somewhat forces the Yone to go top, unless they don't really want a tank or only to have a tank jungle or tank support on Boise State. The problem with the Trundle first pick is that there are meta picks that do hard counter it, specifically Renekton. Boise here, in Phase 2, should take their AD carry and jungler. If they expect Dean to carry, they should save last pick for him so that he can get the counter into that matchup. Here they decide to take Jhin and Seraphine. Jhin is usually considered to be the second best AD carry in the meta, so that's no real surprise here. And Seraphine, while you can flex that into the mid, you're expecting that pop star to go into the bot lane, usually in the support position, especially with the Jhin already being picked up. Wyoming then pigeonholes their draft by picking Katarina. Not a terrible pick, seeing the presumptive mid lane pick for Boise in the Yone and picking what they want into it. The problem is if that Yone is in fact top, Wyoming has now picked all three of their carries in first rotation and can easily be counterpicked with only Yone really being locked in. What you would expect to see from the second ban phase here from Wyoming is a Renekton and a Mordekaiser ban. And you would expect that Boise here bans engage supports to keep the Kaisa from being a terror. I would see Leona and Alistar or Leona and Nautilus. And then we would also expect that because we have the mid lane and bot lane of Boise against two solo lanes and the AD carry from Wyoming, the draft should be pretty much won here from Boise, with really them not doing all that much. Wyoming just kind of played into Boise's hand. They picked their three carries, and this should be fairly easy to get a counter matchup into the top lane or the mid lane, into the Katarina if you want to send the Yone top, or play the Yone into the Katarina and pick whatever you want into the top lane. In this second ban phase, Boise opts into banning two high priority AP junglers, Nidalee and Lilia, while Wyoming removes Mordekaiser, which we've already said was a good idea, and confusingly Nautilus. The Mordekaiser can be understood as a counter that they wanted to remove from the top lane. That's a difficult pick for the Trundle to play into, but the Nautilus ban is a weird one. This might have been a gamble, thinking that the Seraphine was going mid and the Yone top, But then the next pick to come out from Wyoming is the Blitzcrank, which would imply that they think that the Seraphine is bottom, because you'd want to play an engaged support into that squishy AP Mage, so why didn't they just pick Nautilus and ban something else? This is a weird draft, and the only thing that Wyoming is missing right now is their jungler. They saved their last pick to get the jungler on a comfortable matchup and hope that the other 4 people on that team can carry. Boise then, in their last rotation, picks Renekton. The Croc fills out their comp really well and is a counter to Trundle. They just need a jungler now. This is Renekton top, Yone mid, Jhin bot, and Seraphine support, fairly AD heavy. So they did realize what they did in ban phase 2. They banned out 2 high priority AP jungles, and there are still 2 left. You could go Elise or Gragas. Both are high win rate solo queue picks. Gragas being a high priority pick in all regions of professional play, and Elise just generally being good right now. Instead of doing that and then having a dive comp, they threw the pick ban, honestly, and they picked Zoe. They could have easily had a team of Renekton, Elise, Yone, Jhin, and Seraphine, or switch that out with the Gragas, which would be a well-rounded, relatively early game team comp with an easily identifiable win con. Dive top or mid, get that lane ahead, and then blast Wyoming in the early to mid-game skirmishes. With the Renekton and Gragas, you're basically unbeatable. This dream draft is completely the opposite of Boise's playstyle. They're a bot-focused team, which is why they had to switch it up at the last moment. However, Boise was up 1 game in this series, so it's not that big of a deal to try and play a different playstyle, and now there's an extra thing that people need to be worried about in future best of 3s. If they win this game with a Renekton top and an Elise jungle or something similar, then everyone else needs to be afraid of Boise's top side. Instead, they shoved Zoe into a support role, a Jhin mid into a Katarina, 2 squishy mages, Seraphine and Zoe, into a Blitzcrank, and then they have 0 jungle priority with a carry top. I don't know why they decided to do this. I understand that Zoe is a signature-ish pick, therefore Dean in the bot lane, but in response to this, Wyoming just looks at their jungle and asks for a comfort pick. They've banned like 8 jungles at this point, and they pick Skarner. It's fine. It's a tank jungle. It's going to be fine, and there's no tank on Boise's side. The Scorpion is just going to run in, stun and suppress someone, and Wyoming is going to be able to 100-0 anyone on the side of Boise State. Wyoming now has a really good pick in the skirmish comp. If a rocket grab from Blitz lands, they have more than enough engaged to follow up. And also just really 2 strong carries in the Kaisa and the Katarina with a supportive jungle. Boise has 5 members to want to look for picks, and then literally nothing after if that pick fails to happen. If this team on Boise gets behind it all, they just fall apart. They get run down because there's just nothing they can really do. And they hope for a 5-man Seraphine ult to wombo combo them the game. But all in all, from what was a really, really good first rotation draft from Boise State, was just thrown at the end by flexing all of their picks around into off roles that they really just shouldn't be in. Why pick Jhin mid when you already have a Jhin and a Seraphine? Just throw that into the bot lane. Pick the Yone into the Katarina. That might suck for the Yone, but you have a counter lane in the top lane. You have a decently fine lane in the bot lane, and just pick Gragas. Even if you're not practiced on him, he's not a hard champion. Unsurprisingly, this draft led to a game 3 with Boise eventually picking up the series win.